Two things I want to say about this. So we've called this, we started off thinking about 5G as a double-edged sword. And then we said, look, 5G, are we ready? And I think what I want to do with this today is to simply flesh out some of the issues emerging around 5G. Certainly there are planning issues to do with masts, visual amenity, communities impacted. I myself, what Don didn't say, I'm a counsellor as well in Brighton. I got another email yesterday about another application which was previously refused for a mast and has literally just come in again. So that's, that continues to be an issue. But I think what we also were hoping to do with this is also flesh out some of the benefits that can come from 5G so that we can then be part of a balanced conversation that talks about visual amenity and beauty, health, but also technological advantages and where we could benefit potentially in the future from this technology as it rolls out. And I think in a conversation this morning with a planning lawyer from Pinsent Masons in the city, and then a planner at ICNE Project, we tried to do this separately. And I think what we agreed at the end is that when these things are presented to communities at public engagements, events, which are very few around masts, to councillors and to all engaged parties, these things are not generally discussed in such an open manner, and they tend to be fairly confrontational in the main. So hopefully this will flesh out for you what some of the issues are, so you're better informed, but then better able to have, I think, a conversation with those people that come to you and say, yes, why can or why can't we have a 20-meter mast at the end of our street. So hopefully we'll do that. We can, that's something we can have a conversation about at the end of the talk. So I'll kick off with this slide. You've got two numbers there, and the one on the right that says unique mobile subscribers globally, these are the global numbers from the GSMA, the GSM Association. That's the trade body for the mobile operators, the GSM operators. And you've got 5 odd million unique mobile subscribers. The other number, I think, crucially concerns us more because it also includes other connections. So Internet of Things connections, other connected devices, and so on. So these are in a way more prevalent now than the unique mobile numbers, which are the individual handsets with a SIM card that each one of us carries around with them. And to put that into context, that kind of comes in now in that gray line, which is the 4G line, which is mobile broadband services and applications. So any device that's connected, be it a Philips light bulb, a toothbrush, and so on. So there's so many of these devices out there. Your Nest temperature control at home, and so on. And that's where we are in this cycle where we moved on from 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. So we started up calls and texts, all the way back. I can't remember when that first call on Vodafone was made. Is it 1994? Probably before that, actually. That first voice call on a mobile device might have been 86. And then data with 3G coming in. Some of us still get, this morning I had 3G on my handset, so we still get 3G. The coverage isn't sometimes where we want it to be. And I'll start off with this. Apologies if the screen keeps on jumping. So I wanted to give you a snapshot on how things look like at the moment when we look at a geography of London, and just looking at 3, that's the network, and then Vodafone later on. So the purple bits on here are the 5G areas, and you see there's a limited connectivity yet in terms of coverage. And if you were to zoom out of this map, I haven't got that to show you, but actually, what you see is a reflection of, say, if you're looking at the motorway map of this part of the country. It's got that kind of radial in nature coming out of central London. But it's curious to see where those purple bits are. We're looking at EE this morning in Canary Wharf, and there's a big blob of purple bang in the middle of the Isle of Dogs, where a couple of exclusive residential developments are. So it's kind of, you could begin to map, if you like, certain issues around quality of space and perhaps inequality in terms of coverage. This is more looking at that East End of London stretch heading out from Aldgate. And you could see the purple bits, probably just trial areas for 5G in this instance, heading out into Tower Hamlets. And then Vodafone, you could see more purple, certainly more advanced in terms of their 5G coverage across that central swathe of the London corridor out to London City Airport. And then if we look at, again, that Aldgate corridor, you'd see, definitely a higher concentration there around emanating from, Fenchurch Street, heading out to the city towards Whitechapel and into Tower Hamlets. The gaps in between, I was trying to kind of look at those. This is essentially where all the signal strength corridors are. It doesn't mean that outside those you don't get any signal, but actually this is where your strongest signal connection is at the moment. And that simply also shows you, how you've got a layered kind of 3G provision with a 4G plus, which is like the 4.5G in effect, and then the 5G provision on top, coming into play. What has COVID done to the rollout of 5G provision and equipment? The GSMA tells us, look, there's been issues, two things: issues with supplies and equipment, mostly coming out of China. Huawei, I think you'll know, is the biggest supplier of 5G equipment globally. The sales of smartphones have also suffered as a result of COVID, with the shops closed and the factories in China closed and so on. And since some of them have opened up, but also the rollout of equipment has meant that the GSMA has reduced the forecast of 5G adoption for 2020 by a quarter, roughly. You're still getting quite a lot. You're still getting around 128 million 5G connections by the end of 2020. But then they're saying, look, in 2 years time, it'll all be back on track, partly because of the momentum around 4G in some parts of the world. And some, and it's not single speed deployment and rollout of equipment. Some countries are deploying the infrastructure faster than others. The World Economic Forum has waded into this conversation. 5G not far in their mind in terms of the economic impact it can have on society, on industry, and the creation of new value for consumers in terms of services. So if you're on a hunt for a good read, this is definitely a good document published by the WEF and PwC, the global team. And then this one that Raconteur published not that long ago. And apologies, there's a lot of stuff happening on this slide, but if I draw your attention to the bit that says 5G roadmap in that sort of bottom right hand side, and it's the kind of turquoise bluish lines on there, and you could begin to see when they think some of the things that we've been talking about for a while could actually be with us, if you like, more. We can sense their presence more. So AR and VR, virtual reality. For example, that second line from the top, and we're looking at the turquoise line that says common use. 2025, we think. Below that, smart cities. We're still, even going into 2026, we're still in initial use and trials. So if you hear people saying, look, you know, smart cities are with us. Yes, we've got trials and various bits here and there with us already. But for us to see something more substantial, it's going to be well into the late 20s that we can begin to see some of that happening. And the same for autonomous vehicles, but actually the transition from initial use into common use. I mean, pre-COVID, probably we saw a cutoff point 2022, 2023. You know, what COVID will do to the automotive industry generally anyway is up in the air and anybody's guess at the moment. And the same for drones as well. So Raconteurs saw a 2023 really common use event there, which again may or may not happen, but it's interesting that kind of mapping some of these key technological bits. And for that to happen, excuse me, for that to happen, we need a lot of things to fall into place. We need those test beds, which we've had in places like Brighton, London, Glasgow, and a few other places as well, to show results and to show those very quickly. Newcastle City Futures, for example, has done quite a lot of work on mapping digital innovation. But again, mainstreaming that, where, you know, everybody out on the streets begin to comprehend and understand it, is a long way away. I mean, I generally, you know, have no qualms in sort of saying to the folks in Brighton, you've had a catapult test bed. Well, you've had a catapult that then hosted the 5G test bed, you know, nearly 1.5, coming up to 2 years. What exactly have you done? And the answer is probably very, very, very little. And it's because we're not seeing that connection between economic competitiveness and the digital economy, but also the articulation of that social value and public benefit when you factor in public concerns around this kind of infrastructure, which includes health from electromagnetic radiation and so on and so forth. So articulating the business case and the social value are crucial bits. And for me, they're stumbling blocks in this process of rolling this out. Business will tell you otherwise. Business will tell you, hey, the enthusiasm is going strong. You know, certainly they're very excited about what 5G could do for the economy, you know, whether it's logistical hubs or data centers and so on and so forth, you know. And God knows, you know, if we get a planning application for a data center down the road from us, what the reaction would be like. We're going to start explaining to people what these things are and what they do. And it's that relationship across all of those actors that are involved in this process. And I've tried to map them here in very simple terms, you know. So we've got government and the legislation around 5G equipment. You've got the networks and the operators. You've got the regulators. You've got the agents that send out the letters on behalf of the operators, saying to people, we're going to stick a mast in your neighborhood and so on. There's the role that local government and councils and the London boroughs in London have to weigh as well. And I've put in economy, health, and planning. And actually there may be other issues there as well around digital, but I think digital is probably embedded in each one of those as well. And, you know, there's the bit also around the communities and what they perceive as important. You know, some of them will pick on the health angle, and some of them will pick up on the visual aspects. So, you know, whether whether a 20-meter mast needs to be this white lollipop shaped element, or could it look any different? And that's probably one part of the innovation that's missing. And the other bit that's missing there, I've kind of highlighted a survey by the Municipal Journal and BT, where 56% of councils that responded said senior management have not actually sat down as an integrated team, so representatives from all those various parts of the local authority and the industry, apologies, to, if you like, to map, what the issues are, what the concerns are, what the transformative effects or the impacts on the economy could be, so that you could have a clear and open conversation with everybody that's involved. Because as it is, and this is from the Islington Tribune from, it's not that long ago, November 2019, where, where you've had residents obviously complaining because the 5G antennas were going at the top of their council estate. But when you dig deep, and I've highlighted a bit of text here from the article, they're also the same people complaining about fire safety issues within their blocks. So Tribune previously reported 2017, residents have long battled for better fire safety measures in their homes, and so on. So for residents of these blocks, these things are interconnected. They don't see things the way they do, because they live these things day in, day out. And the same with this block in Shoreditch, where again, EE's initial 5G sets of equipment, this is September 2018, so this is going even further back, with very little consultation with members of the public. And then you've got the bits around health, which I think for me, they kind of came to a head in Brighton, because we had a 2,240 odd signature on a petition that came to council that said, look, we want you guys to debate the benefits. We looked at the advice from Public Health England, which basically said, they're fine, they're within tolerance. But, if you felt very strongly, you wouldn't necessarily go with that. You would continue to challenge that. And certainly there are people who still do that. And then curiously, in spite of all of the debate, in spite of all the, if you like, the explanations from Public Health England and from the team in the economic development in the city, also articulating the economic benefits, because we also asked for those to come in. If I move on, you'll see that councillors still sit at a committee and say, yeah, we're still not sure. We still don't know what benefits this would bring to the area. Well, in theory, you should, because you've got the reports in front of you that say, look, there's clearly a health issue. There's also an economic benefit issue. There's also a public concern issue, and there's the beauty argument as well. So you really have to keep all of these things. You have to take all of these things into account, but then make a decision, rather than simply say, we're not sure what the benefits are, but because there's enough objections here, we're going to say no and send it back. So you're effectively kicking this into the long grass, because it's going to come back, as the email that came to me yesterday, shows that they're going to come back again, because this infrastructure has to go up, fortunately or unfortunately, at speed. And last year in November, the Royal Town Planning Institute issued publicly, I think, its response to the government's consultation on including mass upgrade as part of permitted development. And even though we've had new PD regs come out today, but we still don't know what the outcome of that consultation on the deployment of 5G equipment is. But clearly the Town Planning Institute felt strongly that, certainly the risks need to be highlighted. Making this part of permitted development, I think, needed a broader discussion and consultation, because what it will do is it will reduce opportunities for the community to offer a voice, if you like, on how they feel about the mass and the infrastructure. And then it might mean that engagement would probably not be as good as it should be, and it simply be as token as possible, as a letter or a notice on a lamppost. So these are some of the issues out there. in a very complex field, and they kind of all link and intertwine with each other. What I'll do next, if you like, this is the second half of the talk, is to try and draw out some of the issues. But I think there may be some benefits that we should be aware of, and they cut across multiple sector. So the first one is this idea that 5G needs to be in a mast and needs to be wireless. It doesn't. It can actually be cabled fiber optic as well. So, you know, there are certain buttons we can push in terms of, or levers that we can push in terms of what we want in our local neighborhoods. Do we need 5G? But it depends. I mean, it's a tough one, I think, because you could argue, yes, you know, we are going to get it anyway, like we had 3G and 4G before it. But certainly what is worth highlighting is that part of that leveling the landscape, so to speak, that you're aware of some of the issues out there. And we know that, you know, some of the innovations around autonomous vehicles or rail or the utilities, you know, they will need 5G in order to be able to operate more effectively and efficiently and effectively in the future, particularly as we look at more and more automation in factories, in the delivery of things, say, that come to us at home, for example, online orders and so on, various shops, supply chains and supply lines as well. So all of those are important. There's also the gaming industry, which certainly is beginning to show lessons to other industries. And virtual reality headsets, for example, are now being used in medicine as a key part of this delivery of telemedicine. And COVID has effectively given a booster shot to that industry. And the key word here is latency. And what latency is, in effect, it's the time, if you're online in a game, it's that amount of time between you pressing a button on the controller and something happening within the game, within the environment of the game. And I've put here the example of autonomous vehicles, just to show you how significant a decrease in the latency time actually can be. And we're talking milliseconds here, you know, we're not even talking a second. The car on the right, we'll start with that one, 4.6 feet is the stopping distance for a 4G car, i.e. again, between somebody, assuming somebody at the control, you know, within the car itself rather than remotely at this point, the onboard computer giving the order for the car to stop. 4.6 feet, that stopping distance under 4G, that under 5G comes down to 10 milliseconds. That's how significant a reduction in time that is. And you know, we might think, look, in some contexts it will have an even bigger impact. And we also need to compare it to, say, a wired connection at home, where I think that wired connection at home, that latency within, you know, comparable context could be around 15 milliseconds for what would normally be under a 4G connection, 50, and under a 5G around 20, and a wired connection at home on a broadband 15. So that's the kind of competing, if you like, environment within which 5G needs to operate. And it will matter for healthcare and telemedicine here. It will matter obviously for people living in rural areas where doctors cannot necessarily, in some cases, access people if they fall ill. And we now, you know, most of us are used to, I guess those of us who have spoken to our doctors during lockdown will be used to speaking and explaining and exploring and receiving files as well and sending files across. We need that kind of bandwidth to do that, and we need that good quality signal, because that means we're then able to transmit large files. It means doctors are able, and you'll see the way they teach medicine these days in some places, it's all virtual reality. Theaters are virtual, the equipment, everything else happens within that virtual environment, where at least you're able to train doctors to do some of the less invasive and some of the complex scenario planning scenarios for various operations as well. So these are some of the benefits that come through this context. And I mentioned gaming before, and it's that loop back time. So latency as that loop back time, and the example I gave you before. So getting data from the mobile user to the network and back, 20 milliseconds generally. That's what you need to have, that quick kind of instant response time. The current average in the UK is 50. And it's, as I said before, if you were competing with a cabled fiber optic broadband connection, that's 15. So actually, to get your wireless, if you like, infrastructure to come down and compete with your wired one, you need some improvement there to get that 50 as close to that 15 as possible. And 5G should, in theory, be able to give you as close to that 15 in order to create that seamless augmented reality experience, which will then not only have an impact on the gaming sector, but it also, I think, as we've said, have an impact on health, on surgeries potentially done remotely. It could have an impact on planning, where artificial intelligence these days is being applied in some local authorities to effectively sift through, do that initial sift of planning applications as part of development management, not the strategic planning part of it, not the policy part, but certainly the development management part of the process, where it's being used more and more, and certainly in diagnosing diseases as well. I've listed here interior design, fashion. It's the potential remains substantial, but again, it's a potential that I think we should highlight, because it will have an impact on the economy. And I'll end with that piece, which is the broader economic impact of 5G. Because it's not something we could measure just yet. We know it's there. We know it will be there in the future. We should be aware of it. We should be able to at least have a conversation with the industry itself in terms of how we get there. And it's got to be, on terms that everybody agrees to, rather than on terms that one side imposes on another party. Certainly, I think for me in planning, from a planning perspective, it's beyond an email that says we're gonna replace your 12-14 meter mast with a 20 meter mast, because we need to do that, because government's telling us to do that, and we have to give you 5G equipment in order to deliver 5G services, whether you like it or not. I think there has to be more to that conversation than what the current landscape is offering. Both professionals, communities, and policymakers, I think, need to be more proactive and more joined up in their thinking. And I will stop there. Don, if I can bring you back, but then what I will do is I will stop sharing my screen.
And I am just hopefully coming back in, and let me get the gallery view up. Super. I mean, just following on from what you were saying at the end there, one of the first questions comes from that, and I'd just say, if anyone has got questions, start tapping them into the Q&A now. But this is from Claire San Martin, who says public engagement is clearly vital to planning the infrastructure in a sustainable way. So we're going to balance the economic, health risks, visual amenity, all of that sort of thing. Is there a way of integrating that with a greening strategy of some sort?
I mean, that's an interesting one. So thank you for that. I mean, certainly there are options for integrating this along with more policies that are generated locally. I'm a treasurer of the Hove Park Neighbourhood Forum, and what we've done, having recently come into the forum where, you know, over a period of time not much has happened, we've said, look, you're obviously getting a lot of planning applications to transform, you know, big detached and semi-detached wood dwellings into flats. You've also got all of those masts coming through the planning systems. You've got houses in gardens being proposed as well. Why don't we come up with a series of things that we think might be useful for you as a community, as you then engage with not only the promoters of 5G equipment, but also the local authority on multiple fronts. So I've suggested that we do, well, 3 things, but actually 2 of them are relevant in this case. One is a housing needs assessment, which kind of begins to determine what you can or cannot do with your green spaces. But I think linked to that is a design coding exercise. What do you want things to look like? And that goes from everything from your fences to your buildings, your apartment blocks, your terraces, but also your 5G equipment, you know, because we know what they're like. You know, they're clunky equipment in cabinets. They're sometimes white, mostly, you know, green or gray, sitting on the edge of the park with a mast sticking out in the middle of them. And one of the things we're now looking at is some sort of design for, if you like, taking the cabinets underground, but we're struggling what to do with the mast, because I think for that we need engagement with the telephone, with the mobile industry, which apparently the grant for neighborhood planning does not cover, but that's, so we're trying to have a separate conversation. So sometimes there are barriers even when you want to do this. And the other thing we're doing is a green space strategy. But that's also the quality of green space, parks, everything else. We're doing everything from, you know, the stuff that sit in a park, whether it's a mast equipment, benches, you know, football pitches and so on, tennis courts, and the like, but also the quality of that green space. So it's possible to have a conversation, and then people can come into that conversation depending on what's important to them. And people will push certain things into the conversation. You know, it could be masts, as is the case. It could be, you know, our bins are too small in hot weather, for example. We need bigger bins, we need more bins, we need recycling bins as well, you know. So all of those come as part of the conversation. And I think sometimes it's beyond the power of a neighborhood forum to kind of put order to all of these things. And we're not at the point where, other than going to officers on an ad hoc basis, we're not at the point where we say, well, we know exactly what we're going to do here. Certainly, it can be attempted, you know, so we're trying to do it. Whether it's going to work or not, I don't know. But we've also got digital tools, you know. You've got Locomizer that provides data on mobility, so we're trying to use that. You've got Commonplace that kind of then allows you to tag certain things that are important to you. So all of those tools are there. Just making sure that they're also accessible to everybody. And I mean, all I would say is the last 3 or 4 months, you know, under lockdown, it's been a challenge to continue to do all of this was a challenge, but it also allowed us to think more creatively about how we approach things.
Mm. And well, a follow on from that, are there examples of good 5G equipment design that can be shown to communities as precedents, or is there a situation where it can be councils or local authorities, if you like, going back to the operators and saying, we do not want ugly mast 1A, come back with something a little bit more beautiful for us to have it in our thing. How much of this is being forced down by the network operators or the infrastructure operators, and how much influence do local authorities have in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have more influence than they think they have. But you'll have heard me say in those slides, actually, they've not had those integrated conversations amongst themselves. So it kind of then becomes very difficult because there's no one voice that can go back to the mobile operators who are pushing down the equipment, because they have to install them so that they can supply the 5G service. And I think including those under permitted development, I'm really hoping we will know more about that consultation, which was done last year. What that's going to do. It's a tricky one. And in this morning's conversation, for example, between the three of us, like I said, planning lawyer from Pinsent Masons and the planner from Iceni, we sort of said, yes, we need better designs, but I can't tell you what they look like, because and we didn't think we're the first people to come up with that kind of conversation lead. But certainly I suspect there are other people having similar conversations, but I don't think that anybody knows what that solution looks like. I speak to friends in the GSM service, and they don't even think about that. For them, a mast is a mast. It's it doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be a tree or something else to do the job as a mast. It's a mast. Why do you want it to look any different? They don't understand that conversation. I mean, I was going to say bless them, they're engineers, but I'd like to think that they're enlightened engineers that understand why. At least we're asking them, why does a mast need to look like that? Why can't it look like something else?
And you've mentioned the permitted development a couple of times. Is there a danger that if the masts are allowed through permitted development, then opposition will become more vocal simply because people feel they don't have any say in what's going on? So there's no obligation on the networks, the local authorities or whatever to explain the benefits. These things will just go up, and therefore people will react much more strongly against them.
Yeah. I mean, I hope we have learned from the conversations around permitted developments in homes and the conversion of offices in desolate industrial estates into houses when we look at this. So we don't want to be in a position where we're simply creating the 5G mast version of the warehouse conversion into a flat without windows, or a bedroom without windows. I think we don't want to have that 5G mast equivalent of that. I'm hoping that the lessons have been learned, where actually, you need those to be, we understand why you want to do that. We understand that you need them to have the utility for which they were built, which is to provide the service, but you also understand that, like a house needs to have a garden or an outdoor space and so on and so forth, natural light, that these must actually offer the equivalent of that. I think it's taking those lessons from one sector where PD has developed and evolved, hopefully, into this other sector as well, rather than simply go back to the starting point, because otherwise it's going to take us 2 or 3 years before we begin to have a proper conversation about, what masks should really look like, so that they're not invasive, so that they're beautiful, and so on and so forth, as well as utilitarian for, providing a 5G signal. So it's just taking those lessons and learning them.
And just a couple more questions. Andrew asked that you indicated that 5G is also fibre. Could it be taken into homes in this way rather than a mast going up in a neighborhood?
Yeah, no, so absolutely. So that's where, for example, the utility firms need to come in, because you could also use the existing, cabling infrastructure that they have in order to carry through the the wired 5G element within that. I'm not aware that we've picked that up in this country just yet, but certainly, it is an alternative. Now, it's a more expensive alternative, like everything else, for the operators to provide. But if you're then able to articulate and put a number on the economic benefit of quicker, faster, and probably a happier community, with 5G, if you're able to articulate the numbers and the advantages, you might be able to push that through more quickly. It certainly is an option.
And if anyone's got any final questions, start typing them now. Otherwise, we've got one more with Joe asking that he's heard people ringing into radio programs with an incredibly clear phone voice, on a mobile phone, phoning into a radio show with incredibly clear voices. Is that likely to be 5G? And do you need a 5G phone to get the benefit of 5G? I suppose almost certainly you do, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you've got something like this which is an iPhone 11, it's absolutely useless when because it's not even 5G enabled when you've got 5G kicking in. But I mean, that voice quality is interesting, because the other day we did a BBC recording for engineers, re-engineering the future, and they made us stick our headphones in. And I don't normally put my headphones in when I talk to the computer, but then make sure you've got a mic and headphones and everything else, so that you get the crisper sound quality. But I don't think, I mean, it might be that people call in and they kind of do that, but not all of us have the benefit of, I'm here in a self-contained room, but not everybody has, under lockdown, the luxury of having that. And certainly I've had lots of conversations with people, operating out of their kitchens with all sorts of background noises. So it's been tough. So.
Yes, there is that. And a final question, is 5G more expensive to roll out than earlier generations? Because I think I've heard that the masts there need to be more masts, for example, but whether that's true or not.
Yes, I mean, they need to be more, I think off the top of my head, you need to have more masts because it's a shorter signal length. So you need kind of more masts repeating the signals. If that makes sense. But we've not seen that, and it might be that because we're still dealing with a small number of masts rather than, a broad range of masts. And I certainly haven't seen, just thinking of those Vodafone coverage maps for central London, for example, I don't know whether that has meant, I can't tell you, whether it's meant replacing a whole lot of masts or adding new ones. But certainly with 5G, because of the length of the signal itself, you need more repeater masts to carry through that to a broader area.
Yes, that's just popped up in one of the things that operators were looking to put masts or boosters or whatever you want to call them on street furniture, on lampposts and things like that to get that local coverage. And
absolutely,
whether that started happening yet. So Brighton being a sort of catapult development for it, have there been have you noticed extra masts or infrastructure or more people using their phones? Has this changed anything yet?
No, I mean, not at all. And certainly we've had quite a few mast replacement planning bids rejected at committee. One thing we did say to the council, and this is where that kind of lack of knowledge kicks in, we said to them, look, you obviously have existing 4G masts on council-owned buildings. Can you tell us where they are so that we're prepared for when they come in? But they couldn't even tell us where those masts and where those buildings are. It just shows you the deficit information that the local authorities are operating under. If a local authority cannot tell you which buildings it owns have masts on them, then you've got a long way to go here.
Well, let's hope that this has moved us a little bit along that way, because I know that there are a number of people from local authorities who are listening in today. So I'd just like to say, on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much indeed for your time and your expertise today. That was wonderful. We will be trying to sort this. We're not the most technically proficient organisation in the world, but we will attempt to get the video of this up on the Facebook page and on the website in the next few days. So fingers crossed it works. And
Excellent.
Thank you again for your time. Have a great evening. I mean, it's 7:30, so it's 7:20, so you should be able to get to a nice beachside stroll this evening and get the last of the warmth before the thunderstorms.
Thank you, Don. No, and thank you for hosting this. Thank you, and to the team, and thank you to everybody who signed on to listen to me this evening. It's been lovely. So yeah, have a lovely evening, everybody.
Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Terrific. Take care. Bye bye.